The Garden State is our focus. Senator Andy Kim is here, and so is Jersey City Mayor Steve Fulop. The Point starts right now. New Jersey Senator Andy Kim is right in the middle of raging debates in Washington over tariffs, taxes, and the thick stack of executive orders signed by President Trump on a regular basis. But I want to start out talking to you about deportations. You know, Homeland or Borders are, Tom Homan was in New York this past week, and he was talking about and defending deportations. Now, I know that you had occasion this past week to go to an ICE center. I wonder what your take is on their insistence that they have to get dangerous criminals, their words, out of the country.
Well, look, I think that there would be wide agreement on saying, you know, violent criminals, the dangerous criminals, if that's what they're actually focused on. But I showed up unannounced to the ICE facility in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and I talked with a man, Kramer. He has been 21 years in the United States, has married to a U.S. citizen, 2 U.S. citizen kids. And ICE themselves told me he has no criminal background, no criminal history.
Why did they pick him up?
You know, they haven't given a clear, clear example. You know, he is somebody that is on the pathway to try to get a green card, especially because of his wife. Why are they going after him?
And he didn't come here illegally. I mean, he's been here for 21 years.
He has 21 years. I don't know all the details, and there could be something there on that front. But, like, again, they said it's nothing criminal in that way. He's not a violent criminal. He's somebody that's been, runs a restaurant in his community. He's beloved in his community in Hunterdon County. And, you know, I think that that's a perfect example of just like why Americans are now more and more seeing what's happening and saying this is going too far. This is not what the president said he was going to focus in on. I talked to Kareem at that facility, and it was heartbreaking, him talking about how for over 40 days separated from his kids asking, you know, when are we going to be able to play and be together? And he, you know, he just was so emotional with me, saying like, how is this the country that is abandoning rule of law, not giving him a chance to be able to make his case? You know, and that's something that I think Americans across the political spectrum can understand is not right.
Well, you know, there are new polls out that showed, in fact, a poll by a Republican organization is showing that the president's acceptance on these issues is starting to fall because of this. Do you think that there's going to be some pullback and some reevaluation of cases like the man that you went to visit? Well,
I hope so. I mean, I certainly have heard some of my colleagues in the U.S. Senate and Congress on the Republican side talking about, for instance, Kilmar Garcia's case of just, you know, the administration admitted they made a mistake in deporting him, but, you know, they need to be able to show that they are obeying rule of law. And when the Supreme Court rules, when other courts rule, we cannot have an executive branch that is defiant of the constitutional responsibilities under separation of powers.
So the other thing I want to talk to you about is the fact that when you go back to Washington for the next part of the session, you're going to have to deal with what the president has been calling a big, beautiful bill, which is going to deal with budget cuts, possible cuts to Medicaid, to Medicare, to Social Security. I wonder what your thoughts are and whether, given the fact that there's a lot of consternation on the part of older New Yorkers and older New Jersey residents, what you think is going to happen in terms of trying to protect the benefits that people feel that they've paid in for their whole lives.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, the fact that the Republicans have been targeting Medicaid is something that should be concerning to all of us. You know, 2 million people out of my state of 9 million get their health care through Medicaid. People with disabilities, seniors in long-term care centers, 1 out of every 3 kids in New Jersey on Medicaid. But it isn't just about those on Medicaid. I was talking to a hospital leader in New Jersey. His hospital, you know, handles all sorts of people across the community. He told me that if Medicaid is cut by a substantial amount, their hospital might not be able to keep their doors open. And that'll affect health care for everybody. And that is a New Jersey hospital, let alone rural hospitals in other states. This is something that could very well undermine and collapse the health care system that we have as a country. So it affects every single one of us. And then the question is, why are they doing this? Why are they gutting Medicaid or trying to gut Medicaid and SNAP benefits? And that's where you have to follow the money. And you see $4.5 trillion for giving tax cuts to billionaires and the wealthiest Americans, people who are so wealthy that they have their own personal space program. They're not the ones that are in need right now. And when you tie that in with the tariffs that the president's been pushing on, he is not dealing with the fundamental issue that people elected him from, which is about lowering costs and helping families manage these tough times.
Well, I did read recently that the president is thinking of asking for tax hikes on people who make $1 million a year or more. I suspect that might be something you would get behind.
Well, look, we'll see what the total package is in terms of what they're actually trying to do. But what I've seen from this administration so far, especially with this cabinet of billionaires, is an effort, that is really undermining, a lot of the things that we've been trying to do to be able to provide and be careful about this growing inequality that we have as a nation.
But when I talk to Republican lawmakers in Washington about the possible cuts, they say, I say, aren't your offices being inundated with calls from people who are worried? And they say, yes, but they say, we have to cut waste. So is there waste? Is there fat in these programs that they could find savings from?
There is always places to make things more effective and efficient. That's in the government and the public sector. It's also in the private sector with big corporations. I don't discount that, and I'm prepared to do that. But when you look at what Doge is doing, when you look at what Elon Musk and Doge and what the Republicans do, it's not about efficiency. This is about, with Doge and the cutting of government employees, it's about loyalty. It's about creating fealty. It's about going after and weaponizing our government to be able to serve solely what Trump wants to do with his agenda rather than what's right for our Constitution. And when it comes to effectiveness and efficiencies on that front, what we see is what is their answer for that? And we've seen it in the past, whether it's their efforts to try to privatize Social Security, privatize the VA for our veterans, which they're adamant about trying to push in that direction. These are the types of things we have to guard against.
Let's talk about the tariffs, which have really upended the global economy, which has upended the stock market and the global economy. But I want to ask you something. I've, in the last few days, seen some comments years ago and in the last maybe 10 years by President Clinton, President Obama, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and others who have said that they think it's important to take on China in terms of tariffs because it's an unfair trade balance. They made some of the similar arguments that President Trump is making now. I wonder if you see that there is some reason for trying to normalize trade relations with China.
Well, there is, tariffs are a tool that can be used. And I say that as someone who worked in diplomacy and national security before, absolutely see reasons for that, and especially when it comes to such a challenging competition with a country like China. But what I told Secretary Lutnick and the Trump administration is, if you are going to try to engage with China and apply tariffs, you have to do so in alignment with other countries. We have to build a wider coalition, because a country as large as China is larger than ours. We need to build out the markets. We get the Europeans, get some Asian nations on board to be able to build out and be more effective. If we go it alone, which is what's happening, we're going to put ourselves at a disadvantage. And right now, look at what we have done in terms of our allies and our partners. We are a laughingstock of the rest of the world. And frankly, none of those countries want to deal with us. We've lost that credibility. So our ability to stand up against China is weakened. And that is something where we see that Trump's statement about America first, when you translate that to the global level, it basically means America alone.
Senator, we're going to have to leave it right there for now. But up next is Jersey City Mayor Steve Fulop, a man who wants to succeed Governor Phil Murphy and move into Drumthwacket. Jersey City Mayor Steve Fulop is hoping to move his office 63 miles down the turnpike to Trenton, New Jersey. There's so many issues to talk to you about. Yep. But first, I'd like to talk to you about something that we get a lot of complaints about, NJ Transit. People complain constantly about that organization. If you got elected governor, what would you do?
Let me start by saying it's broken.
Yes, everybody knows that.
Yeah, Phil Murphy made a promise, and I think it's a failure. I think there's a couple things that you could do from the gubernatorial standpoint initially. It's a big part of our platform, obviously. And initially, you could cancel the Turnpike widening project in Hudson
That would have been
County.
my second question.
Yeah, it's $12 billion, and it's a silly project because it's not going to alleviate traffic.
But what would you put that money into NJ Transit?
Yeah, we would put it directly into expansion of the light rail because I think you need more infrastructure. We have a tax that was put in place for 5 years, a corporate business tax. It was actually our suggestion initially on companies that make more than $10 million, but it was only done for 5 years. And you can't bond against a 5-year revenue, so you need to structure that differently so that way we can upgrade our facilities. The buses are privatized. You need to bring that back in-house. PATH need to be moved from the Port Authority actually into New Jersey Transit, and that's a conversation with the Port Authority.
Would the Port Authority agree to that?
They would, because it's kind of like this stepchild that's neglected currently, like both New York and New Jersey.
But where would you get the money to fix it?
So today it has to ultimately be some sort of phase-in over a couple years with regards to PATH. But the reality is that it's neglected today because nobody wants to take ownership for it, and you need to be responsible and just say it's more of a New Jersey asset than it is a New York asset. And so if it continues to get neglected like it has since 9/11, we're going to see the downside on economic development and growth.
So there are some people, including some people running for the Republican nomination for governor, Jack Ciattarelli for one, who have suggested that you take the gas tax and roll that into some kind of a program that helps you to rehabilitate transit in New Jersey overall, especially NJ Transit. But you could also use it for PATH and for other things. What's your take on that?
I think the reality is the gas tax has to be revisited because you're getting more electrification of vehicles. So the whole concept of a gas tax today doesn't work the same way it did 5 or 10 years ago. I think Jack Ciattarelli is living in a world of 5 or 10 years ago and how he's approaching that. And I think that the reality is that there's not enough money in the gas tax today to do the infrastructure for the Turnpike and the Parkway. I think you really need to think about that corporate business tax and expansion on the wealthiest companies in order to make sure that you're funding New Jersey Transit because they benefit from it.
Do you think there's an appetite in Trenton to expand the gas tax, expand the business tax, corporately for a long period of time? I mean, you could put it in perpetuity, but is there an appetite for doing that?
I think if you have a strong governor, there is. And the reality is that those corporations have had record earnings over the last 5 years. So I don't think that you're able to make the argument that it's hurt them on the bottom line. And they benefit from New Jersey Transit. I mean, if New Jersey's going to grow, you need a robust transportation system. So
New Jersey, Jersey City, where you are the mayor right now, just had to cope with a very tragic helicopter accident. And there have been some calls to restrict tourist helicopters. But the mayor of New York City says that's a bad idea because there's $75 million in that industry that brings money to both New Jersey and New York. What's your position on that?
I mean, Eric and I disagree on this, and I've been public on that. For a long time, I've said that it's a very crowded airspace. If that helicopter from a couple weeks ago had crashed 100 yards towards Jersey, a little bit more, it would have been in the middle of a highway. The airspace here is just very crowded. You have the news helicopters, you have transit helicopters, you have tourist helicopters, and then you have LaGuardia, Newark, and JFK. And I think any reasonable person would say it is very congested for a tight area, and it's getting more congested, and that's beyond the quality of life issue. So I think it's reasonable to have some bans, and I think Mayor Adams is wrong.
So would you eliminate it totally?
I think that the reality is that it's not necessary from a tourist standpoint. That's the truth. I think that you could get the same outcome of seeing the skyline and taking pictures of the Statue of Liberty from boats, from the Brooklyn walkways, from the promenade, from Jersey City. And the reality is that this sort of crash will happen again. It's just a very busy airspace, and I think that you should eliminate those tourist helicopters.
So another thing that's happening in New Jersey now is a wildfire that's still burning out of control. And the question is this: there's one this year, there was one last year. It's an ongoing problem. If you were elected governor, what steps would you take to try to prevent that, the fact, and to deal with maybe new technology for dealing with these big out-of-control fires?
Look, I think the reality is that you have a president today that doesn't believe in climate change. And so from the governor's standpoint for New Jersey, you need to be thoughtful of how we move that conversation forward without federal help. And I think there's a lot that you can do, particularly around the firefighting component as far as infrastructure and dollars. I think there's a lot you can do on climate change, on open space without relying on the federal government. But the climate change conversation has become more and more front and center because New Jersey used to never have these sort of huge fires, and you're getting
and now
them more,
it's like almost commonplace.
Yeah, it's getting commonplace, which speaks to the fact that there's less water and there's warmer temperature and drier forests, and all these things kind of play into it.
So in terms of electric rates, another concern of New Jersey, electric rates are supposed to go up in New Jersey on June 1st between 17 and 20%. Nobody's happy about that.
Yeah.
Is there anything that the governor can do to bring down the cost of power in the state?
Well, let me start by saying there's a lot of finger pointing going on between Republicans and Democrats.
Yes, there is.
And I think at the core of the issue in New Jersey, you have something called the BPU, which is the Board of Public Utilities, which is responsible for power and infrastructure. And it's become this dumping ground for former politicians. There's no energy experts there. And I think that at the core of the problem is you have a BPU that's kind of deviated from their core mission. That's a longer-term fix that you need more energy experts and environmentalists on it. Today, I mean, you need to think about kind of who we get our energy from, the intermediaries. There's a lot of finger pointing around that. And as governor,
what about new ways of power? I mean, the president has gone after wind farms. Some people think you should have more nuclear power. Whatever, are there ways, are there new forms of energy that you could support as governor that might help to bring down the cost?
I am all for renewable energy, so I lean into that harder than most, and the reason is because I have a 6-year-old.
Solar power?
Solar power, wind energy. I think that the reality is that the president is supportive of wind energy, but New Jersey should be setting up for the next administration in order to get the procurement and legal paperwork in place so we can move forward. I mean, we missed the boat over the last 8 years because we were slow, but the reality is that you have an environmental crisis in the world. You see it in places like New Jersey, and I think that New Jersey needs to lean in a little bit more into the conversation.
Another issue roiling the waters in Trenton is the proposal in Governor Murphy's budget to increase the alcohol tax by 10%. Small businesses are screaming that they're going to have to pay more to buy alcohol products, whether it's wine or beer or hard liquor.
Yeah.
And they say it's going to be hard on businesses, and given everything else that's happening in the country, it's just going to make another step of driving them out of business. Do you think it's ill-advised, or it's a good thing because of so much money is being made?
I think that the small businesses have a valid argument in saying that at this moment in time, it's probably not who you want to be squeezing. You know, the way the budget is structured in Trenton, you've seen massive amount of increase since COVID dollars were there. Republicans point to that, and they have a valid argument on that. And then you see about $1 billion in these Christmas tree items, which are kind of special projects. And I think that those are probably the places that you should kind of focus on first before you squeeze small business.
Mayor Fulop, we're going to have to leave it right there for now, but our conversation continues right after the show on our streaming channel, CBS News New York. Thank you for joining me. The Trump administration's decision to freeze billions of dollars of federal funds to Harvard and other colleges to get them to fall in line with his agenda sets off a fierce debate among New Yorkers. They're weighing in on your point. What do you think about President Trump's decision to cut funding to colleges?
It's insane.
Disappointed.
Oh, it's horrific, along with everything else.
I've seen a lot in the news about proposed cuts to, I think, Harvard and I know Columbia. So I'm assuming these are based on political stances that the student populations are taking.
I think he's a bully, so bully's bully.
I think that that's perfectly wonderful. It's finally coming out that universities like Harvard have $52 billion that they sit on.
It's a tragic thing that he's cut funding to the universities because, of course, they are the source of all of the good research that's done curing every disease you could ever hope.
It's a social obligation to support progress in academia. And I love President Trump, honestly. And I trust God that he's doing the right thing, and yet at the same time, you know, I'm conflicted.
What do you think about the Trump administration's crackdown on student visas?
I think that he is destroying the foundation of our country, of our democracy, of our Constitution, and yeah.
We're building a wall around the United States that will prohibit, smart young people to help what we're doing.
We need diversity. We need opinions from all other parts of the world. We need their intellectual abilities.
If they have a definite reason to be here and they're vetted and they're not going to be, quote, stealing our ideals, bringing them back to their own country, manufacturing products, and then competing and destroying our businesses, okay.
Personally, I think that our own people, we need to get them educated first, and we need to get our own people wealthy and beautiful like supermodels, and have our own people have mansions and awesome cars, and then we can go out into the world and help the world.
So why do you think the president's cutting funding to colleges and universities?
Because he sees that it's absurd.
There's no rationale to his madness.
I think it's pandering to his base.
I think these colleges and universities are advancing what he thinks are like these woke agenda.
Because they have opposed him, or he suspects that they will oppose them. So that's what he does. Bullies bully.
I think it all comes back to many years ago when Trump was trying to develop the West Side Highway and sell it to Columbia University, that property, and Columbia turned him down, and the amount that the deal was supposedly for was $400 million, which happened to be the exact same amount that he initially punished Columbia with. I think that spawned all the other punishments of the universities.